Case 1. Sean Thomas. Imagine losing 24 years of your life to a murder you did not commit. Then, imagine getting those years back, walking out of prison a free man, and being handed millions of dollars to start over. Sean Thomas got all of that. And then, over a debt of $1,200, he threw every bit of it away. In 1990, a businessman in North Philadelphia named Domingo Martinez was robbed and shot to death. Sean Thomas was convicted of that killing and sent away for the rest of his life. He always insisted he had nothing to do with it, and for a long time nobody listened. Then, in 2017, the truth caught up. Documents surfaced showing that detectives had known Thomas might have an alibi and never bothered to check it. Dozens of pages of witness statements pointing at other suspects had been buried. His conviction was thrown out, and after 24 years behind bars for someone else's crime, he walked free. The city of Philadelphia eventually paid him about $4.1 million for what it had taken from him. The fight to free him had taken years. The work of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project and a former police officer turned lawyer who kept digging until the buried evidence finally came to light. It was the kind of second chance almost nobody ever gets. A clean slate, a fortune in the bank, and the rest of his life to live on his own terms. For a while, Thomas was held up as proof that the system could admit a terrible mistake and try to make it right. People used his name as a story of hope. Then, in the fall of 2022, he made a choice that unraveled all of it. Thomas had given a man named Akeem Edwards a small amount of cocaine to sell, and he expected $1,200 back from the proceeds. Edwards, who was 38, was a childhood friend of Thomas's on-and-off girlfriend, a woman named Ketra Veazey. Edwards took the drugs. He never paid. $1,200 from a friend of a friend is an annoyance, a bad debt to shrug off. Nowhere close to worth risking a $4 million life over. To Thomas, it became a matter of principle. On the 3rd of January, 2023, he picked up Veazey and drove into Philadelphia, and at some point, he suggested they cruise through the old neighborhood and look for Edwards. They spotted him on a corner in the early afternoon. Thomas got out of the car. Veazey later said she did not even know he was carrying a gun. Then she heard the shots. Thomas climbed back in, tucked the weapon into his waistband, and told her the man was down, that she should just drive. She did. Akeem Edwards died on a public street over a debt smaller than a single month of the freedom Thomas had fought so hard to win back. And almost at once, Thomas started trying to bury it in the worst way possible. He leaned on Veazey to stay quiet. He threatened her. And when he began to worry she might talk to police anyway, prosecutors say he tried to arrange to have her killed. It did not work. Veazey agreed to cooperate, and her account put Thomas at the scene with the gun in his hand. She told the court something chilling. After the shooting, she said, Thomas told her this was his third killing and that he could not go back to jail. He warned her to keep her mouth shut, or else. In December of 2024, he pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and gun charges. When the case landed in front of Judge Roxanne Covington, she seemed genuinely staggered that a man with millions in the bank would gamble all of it on a grudge this small. The prosecutor put it plainly. Whatever 25 years in prison had taught Sean Thomas, it had not taught him to walk away from a fight that was never worth having. On the 28th of February, 2025, he was sentenced to 33 to 66 years. A man who had already lost half his life to a wrongful conviction was going back to die behind bars, this time for a murder he actually committed. For Edwards's family, the arithmetic never made sense and never will. His sister said there was not enough time in the world they could give Thomas to make it right. The mother of Edwards's child said his teenage daughter sometimes does not leave her room for weeks at a stretch. Nothing about their lives is the same. There is a cruel symmetry to it. The system stole 24 years from Sean Thomas, admitted it, and tried to pay him back. He took that gift and spent it on a corner in North Philadelphia, on $1,200, and the belief that a debt mattered more than a man's life, and threw away his own freedom right along with it. That is one way to destroy yourself over drugs. You kill over a debt that was real, but so small it could never be worth what it costs you. The next two killers managed something even harder to believe. They killed a man for stealing their drugs when the drugs were already gone, and not because he had taken anything at all. Case 2. Svea Cole and Jimmy Sanchez. They rented a hotel room a block from the airport, lured a man inside, and killed him for stealing 11 pounds of methamphetamine. There was just one flaw in their theory. He had not stolen a thing. The police already had the drugs, sitting in an evidence locker. Before any of this began, Tzvia Cole was 37, from Hallandale Beach, Florida. Jimmy Sanchez was 38, and he lived all the way across the country in Spring Valley, California. The two of them were part of a drug pipeline, and in the fall of 2022, a shipment went missing. About 11 pounds of meth, worth somewhere around $90,000 on the street, had vanished. In that business, a loss like that demands an answer, and someone has to wear the blame. Cole and Sanchez decided that someone was a 46-year-old man named Julio Gonzalez. Gonzalez lived in Hialeah Gardens. He was a Cuban national, and within the operation, he was a low-level figure, the kind of man who took in packages and passed them along. He seems to have understood exactly how much danger he was in. In the days before he died, he posted a photograph of Cole online with a warning. The message was simple. If anything happened to him, she was the reason. Federal investigators would later describe the operation he was caught up in as tied to one of Mexico's major trafficking networks, the kind of organization where a missing shipment is never simply written off. He was right to be afraid. On the 29th of November 2022, the two of them set a trap. Sanchez flew in from San Diego that night. They rented a room at a small hotel in Miami Springs, a place barely a block from the runways of Miami International Airport, and they got Gonzalez to come to them. Once he was inside, Cole handed Sanchez a gun, and as the situation turned, Gonzalez did the only thing left to do. He called 911. He never got to finish telling the dispatcher where he was. The recording captured the sounds of a struggle and then gunshots. Sanchez shot him and left him in the room. They had taken the room for hours, long enough to do what they came to do and be gone before anyone noticed. His body was not found until the next morning. Here is the detail that turns this from a brutal killing into a senseless one. The drugs Gonzalez supposedly stole, the 11 pounds that cost him his life, he had never touched them. Law enforcement had already seized that shipment. The meth Cole and Sanchez were so certain he had betrayed them over was already gone, pulled off the street by police before the two of them ever rented that room. They killed a man for a theft that had not happened, to avenge the loss of drugs that were already locked in a property room. Think about what that actually means. There was no traitor. There was no theft. The shipment had never slipped through Gonzalez's hands at all. It had been intercepted by police, a routine seizure he had nothing to do with. And yet he is the one who paid, lured into a room and shot for a betrayal that only ever existed in the minds of the two people who killed him. And they were nowhere near as careful as they believed. That 911 call, the one Gonzalez could not finish, captured the attack as it unfolded, second by second. The hotel's security cameras caught Cole and Sanchez walking out of the building right afterward. Federal agents pulled the threads together, and the case against the pair became overwhelming. In January of 2026, both pleaded guilty. Sanchez admitted he was the one who pulled the trigger. Cole admitted she was the accomplice who put the gun in his hand. The investigation reached across the country, from Florida to Southern California, where Sanchez had flown in from. Piece by piece, the phone, the footage, the flight, the rented room, it all came together into a case the two of them could not talk their way out of. A federal prosecutor laid it out for what it was. They armed themselves, they set the man up, and they killed a man over a package that the police had already taken off the board. In April of 2026, the sentences came down. Cole received 230 months, a little over 19 years. Sanchez, the one who fired, received 330 months, closer to 27. 2 long prison terms for a murder that accomplished nothing, recovered nothing, and avenged a theft that never even took place. They killed a man to settle a score that did not exist, and they will spend most of what is left of their lives paying for it. Prosecutors held the case up as part of a wider push against violent crime in South Florida, the message being that settling drug trade scores with bullets would be answered with decades behind bars. Cole and Sanchez at least believed the drugs had been real once. The two men in the next case worked themselves into a frenzy over a stash that was never in the house to begin with, and a man was beaten to death because of it. If these stories are pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. It is free. And it is the thing that keeps these cases coming. Case 3. Raul Edgar Herrera and Angelo Cervantes. Two friends who had known each other their entire lives crept into a house in Nampa, Idaho, in the dark before dawn. They were certain the place was stuffed with prescription pills, hundreds of them just waiting to be taken. They beat a man to death, tearing the house apart looking for them. They walked out with two. Raul Edgar Herrera and Angelo Cervantes were not just partners in crime. They were born on the very same day, the 4th of November 1993, at the same hospital. They grew up side by side, and they started selling drugs together back in junior high. By the time they were grown men, Herrera was dealing oxycodone and collecting his debts the hard way, with his fists. Cervantes had been using drugs since he was a small child, by his own account, and he owed Herrera around $5,000 he had no way to pay. The two of them were tangled together in the worst way, one the dealer and the other the addict who could never climb out from under what he owed. That debt, and Herrera's certainty that there was a fortune in pills to be had, was the engine behind everything that came next. The man they set their sights on was a 46-year-old named Jeffrey Dyer. They knew him only by a nickname, Red. Dyer had taken money from Herrera for a supply of oxycodone, the pills dealers call blues, and he had never delivered them. To Herrera, that made Dyer's house a target. He convinced himself Dyer was sitting on a hoard of around 200 pills, each one worth $30 to $60, a small fortune stashed somewhere inside those walls. Before dawn on the 8th of November 2014, the two of them dressed head to toe in black and slipped into Dyer's backyard. Their opening came when Dyer's elderly father opened the door to let the dog out. The father, Ronald Ghostwolf, was 74. They shoved their way inside. One of them knocked the old man down, beat him, held him at gunpoint, and tied him up. His injuries were severe: broken bones, a fractured skull, bleeding inside his head. Somehow he lived. His son did not. In the bedroom, Jeffrey Dyer was beaten to death. The weapon was a collapsible metal baton, used with such force that it snapped in two. Then the pair wrapped Dyer's body in a blanket, carried it out to his own Cadillac, and drove across the state line into Ontario, Oregon, where they abandoned the car in a strip mall parking lot, with the body still in the trunk. It was found the following day, and the stash they had killed for, it was never there. After all of it, after beating a man to death, torturing his father, and ransacking the entire house, they came away with 2 pills. 2. The mountain of pills Herrera was so sure about had only ever existed in his head. Cervantes still owed him the $5,000 afterward, because nothing they grabbed came close to covering it. They had stolen gold coins, a sword, a television, even buffalo meat out of the freezer, and dumped a man's body across a state line, all over a hoard of pills that was never in that house. The whole theory had been a fantasy. Herrera built a murder around a stash he imagined. And when the imagined treasure turned out to be 2 loose pills, a man was already dead and there was no taking it back. A tip led police to the pair about a month later. Cervantes, questioned without a lawyer, confessed, and he walked detectives through the whole night. He led them to where the two had burned the clothes they had worn and ditched the bent baton. Cervantes took a deal and testified against the friend he had known since birth. Cell phone tracking placed Herrera heading toward Ontario on the night the body was dumped. The same records traced their route out of Nampa and across the state line, step by step. Detectives had the burned clothes, the broken baton, the phone records, and a confession from the one man who knew exactly what had happened, because he had been there for every minute of it. In the summer of 2015, in a Canyon County courtroom, Herrera was convicted of first-degree murder, along with robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and aggravated battery. Cervantes had already pleaded guilty months before. Cervantes was sentenced to life with a chance at parole after 15 years. Herrera was sentenced to life with 35 years fixed before he could even be considered for release, and the Idaho Supreme Court later upheld it. Ronald Ghostwolf, who lived through the attack that killed his son, could not make sense of any of it. To kill a man over a few $100s and some wounded pride, he said, was something he would never be able to understand. 2 lives were destroyed, and a third man left grieving and broken over a stash of pills that never existed. Herrera and Cervantes shattered 2 families chasing drugs that were not there. The next pair aimed higher and fell harder. They wiped out an entire family over a drug debt, and they were brought down by something as flimsy as the paper tickets sitting in their pockets. Case 4. Daniel Troyer and Ricardo Sanchez Jr. Just before dawn, a family of 4 was found in the grass beside the Florida Turnpike. A father, a mother, and their 2 little boys. The men who killed them believed they had pulled off a perfect roadside ambush and melted into the dark without a trace. They had forgotten about the toll tickets in their pockets. Daniel Troyer and Ricardo Sanchez Jr. were both around 25 years old, and they ran with a drug ring based out of West Palm Beach. The family they destroyed was the Escobedo family. Jose Luis Escobedo was 28. His wife, Jessica, was 25. Their 2 sons were 4 and 3 years old. The family had moved to Palm Beach County from the Brownsville area of Texas only a few months earlier, looking, like anyone, for something better. Inside the drug ring, Jose Luis Escobedo was tangled up in a debt. The men he answered to decided that debt would be paid in blood and that the entire family would pay it. The ring was run by a man named Danny Varela, and Escobedo had been the supplier feeding it. When the trust between supplier and crew broke down, the men at the top decided the cheapest way to settle accounts was to erase everyone, parents and children alike. In the early hours of the 13th of October, 2006, the killers tracked the Escobedos onto a dark, empty stretch of the turnpike near Port St. Lucie. Cell tower records would later show both vehicles traveling north and then south in tandem, the killers shadowing the family. Toll booth cameras caught the killer's van and the family's Jeep entering the turnpike one right after the other in the dead of night. A few minutes after that, people living nearby were jolted awake by gunfire. The family was stopped and killed at close range on the shoulder of the highway. When their bodies were found that morning, Jessica was still holding her 2 small sons in her arms. That is as much of that scene as anyone needs to picture. The men responsible were sure it was clean. No witnesses, an empty highway, the middle of the night. But they had left a trail behind them without ever realizing it. When you drive the turnpike, you take a paper ticket at the toll and you hand it back when you exit. Those tickets had passed through the killer's hands. Investigators lifted fingerprints off them. Each ticket carried a time and a place, and the prints on them put both men on that stretch of highway, moving in step with the family. In the same window the family was killed. The shell casings left in the grass were matched to ammunition found inside the killer's own home. Prosecutors said the motive was the drugs themselves, roughly 15 kilograms of cocaine taken from the family that night. When investigators searched the killer's West Palm Beach home, they found more than 1 kilogram of cocaine, along with other drugs and more than a dozen firearms. The ledgers told the story of who owed what. The evidence told the story of who had died for it. The case went to federal court in West Palm Beach. In 2009, Troyer and Sanchez were convicted on 11 counts, including armed carjacking resulting in death. The defense had tried to pin the murders on a Mexican drug crew over a debt across the border, but the jury did not buy it. A jury recommended death for the murders of the 2 children, and the men received life terms for the parents. For years they sat on federal death row. Then the ending changed. In December of 2024, the president commuted nearly every federal death sentence in the country, and the death sentences for Troyer and Sanchez became life in prison without the possibility of parole. So the punishment is no longer execution. It is the rest of their lives in a cell, with no road out. In Florida, prosecutors have since talked about trying to bring a death sentence back under state law, but as things stand, the 2 men who destroyed the Escobedo family will die in prison rather than in an execution chamber. The change did nothing to soften what they had done. It only altered how their lives would end behind bars, not the fact that they would. A former sheriff said the image of that mother holding her 2 babies as they were killed never left his head. It is the kind of detail that does not fade, and the men who caused it were undone not by some brilliant stroke of forensic science, but by toll tickets, the small paper receipts they handed over without a second thought, the ones that placed their hands on that highway on the worst night of a family's life. 2 scraps of paper, surrendered at a toll plaza, did what an empty midnight road had seemed to guarantee no witness ever could. They killed 4 people to settle a drug debt, and they were buried by a scrap of paper worth nothing at all. Troyer and Sanchez killed 4 people to settle a debt and were sunk by a paper trail. What came next was a man who killed 5, over money that simply disappeared. He never recovered a dollar of it. What he found instead was the investigation that would put him away twice over. Quick one before we keep going. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it helps these investigations reach more people. Case 5. Juan Francisco Castaneda. 5 men were found inside a quiet apartment outside Birmingham, killed over nearly $500,000 in missing cartel cash. The man who ordered it never recovered a single dollar of that money. What he set in motion instead was an investigation that would put him in prison, and then put him there a second time. Juan Francisco Castaneda went by a nickname, Pariente. He was a member of one of Mexico's most violent and far-reaching trafficking groups, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. He was the kind of man who threatened to kill his own co-defendants during the investigation, telling people he would feed them to the dogs. In the summer of 2008, roughly $450,000 in cartel money went missing. In that world, money does not simply vanish without consequences. Someone gets blamed and someone pays. One faction suspected another of taking it, and Castaneda's answer was to wipe out 5 men he connected to the people he held responsible. This was a feud between factions. One crew convinced the other had robbed them, and the men caught in the middle had no way to prove they were innocent. In that world, suspicion alone is a death sentence. The victims were all young. Jaime Echeverra was 30. 2 brothers, Gustavo and Angel Vega Gonzalez, were 24 and 23. Ezequiel Rebolar Teravan was 23, and Armando Ibarra Mendoza, 31, the oldest of the group, in the wrong place at the worst possible time. On the 17th of August 2008, all 5 were killed inside an apartment at the Cahaba Lakes complex off Highway 280 in Shelby County, Alabama. The men were bound, beaten, and killed, and the killers had taken care to clean the place afterward. The bodies were not discovered until the 20th, during a welfare check. What investigators found inside was the work of men trying to send a message. The victims bound and beaten before they died. The apartment scrubbed in an attempt to wipe away any trace. Within days, the arrests began, and in time 6 men would be charged in connection with the killings. And here is the senseless heart of it. The money, the $450,000 that 5 men died over, was never found. Castaneda killed 5 people to recover cash that stayed missing, and in doing so he lit a fuse under his own operation. A massacre that size does not stay quiet. Rewards went out, tens of thousands of dollars offered for information. Tips came in. A pickup truck connected to the robbery turned up across the state line in Georgia, which helped investigators map out the motive. A multi-agency sweep served 24 search warrants and seized a fleet of vehicles, more than a dozen weapons, and stockpiles of methamphetamine and cocaine. Every one of those leads traced back to the same source, the bodies in that apartment. If the 5 men had simply vanished without a trace, the money would have stayed lost and the case might have gone cold. Instead, the sheer scale of the killing guaranteed that it never would. In 2011, in a Shelby County courtroom, Castaneda pleaded guilty to reduced murder charges that had started out as capital counts. He received 2 life sentences for the 5 killings. For most men, that would be where the story ended. It was not where his ended. Because even locked inside an Alabama prison, Castaneda kept running cartel business. Using contraband cell phones smuggled in behind bars, he directed a drug trafficking and money laundering operation, with couriers and local businesses serving as fronts. Federal investigators found he was responsible for moving more than 19 kilograms of fentanyl from inside his cell. He had turned a prison cell into a command center, using couriers on the outside and local businesses as fronts to move the drugs and wash the money. Investigators built the case patiently, and when it was finished, the man who thought a life sentence was the worst that could happen to him learned otherwise. After 2 days of trial in 2025, he pleaded guilty again, this time to federal charges of trafficking drugs and laundering money. On the 8th of January 2026, a federal judge handed him a second life sentence and entered a $700,000 judgment against him. So the man who killed 5 people to recover $450,000 ended up with 2 life sentences, a massive judgment he will never pay, and not 1 cent of the money he started all of it over. A federal agent called the case a decisive blow against the cartel. For Castaneda, The wound was self-inflicted. The 5 bodies he left in that apartment were the very thing that made him impossible to ignore, the spark that burned his whole operation to the ground. He chased $450,000 into 5 killings and walked away with 2 life sentences and nothing else. The money was long gone by the time the bodies were found, and it was never coming back. Castaneda destroyed himself with the sheer scale of what he did. The man after him began with something that looked almost ordinary by comparison, a simple robbery, one quick job to steal a little marijuana and some cash. By the time it was over, 3 people were dead, each one killed to bury the one before. Case 6. Larry Williams, Jr. A robbery for a little marijuana and some cash was supposed to be the easy part. Instead, the man brought in to handle it shot someone who was not even the target. And to bury that one killing, he ended up having to commit 2 more. By the time it was finished, a simple stick-up had turned into 3 bodies. Larry Williams, Jr. went by the street name J Streets. He was in his early 40s, and he was a leader inside a narcotics operation that moved a range of hard drugs and robbed other dealers when it suited them. Williams was the muscle, the man you brought in when a job might turn violent. In the summer of 2018, a crew planned to rob a marijuana dealer at a house in Columbus, Ohio, to steal his product and his cash, and then turn around and sell it themselves. They recruited Williams to make sure it went their way. The operation he ran with was not small. It ran out of a house used as a drug den, a place where people came to buy and to use, and where more than once someone overdosed in the basement and had to be revived. In a world like that, robbing a rival was just another day's work. On the 27th of June, 2018, they hit the house. But during the robbery, Williams shot and killed a man named Connor Reynolds. Reynolds was 23 years old, from Grove City, and he was not the dealer they had come for. He simply lived there. He was in the wrong house at the wrong moment, and he died for it. That single killing is what set the rest in motion. Because now there were people who knew what had happened, and Williams could not afford for any of them to talk. In August of that same year, he murdered a 52-year-old man named Henry Watson to keep him from telling police about the Reynolds shooting. And on the very same day, immediately afterward, he murdered a 48-year-old woman named Tara Pennington because she was a witness too. Henry Watson and Tara Pennington were in their 40s and 50s, ordinary people whose only mistake was knowing something. Neither had anything to do with the original robbery. They died because Williams could not stand to leave a single loose thread. One robbery had become 3 murders, each new killing committed to cover up the one before it. Then came the cover-up of the cover-up. Williams had the crime scene cleaned with bleach and other chemicals. He directed others to conceal the bodies of Watson and Pennington, and they went to great lengths to dispose of the remains, hiding them away so they would not be found. For a while, it worked. What undid Williams was the size of what he had done. A killing inside a robbery might have stayed a single mystery, but 3 bodies, a bleached crime scene, and a string of people who had helped move and hide the dead left far too many threads. Federal investigators spent 5 years pulling on them. Co-conspirators began to cooperate. One of them, a man named Patrick Foster, had directed 3 subordinates to move the 2 bodies and bury the remains beneath fresh concrete in the basement of a house he owned. Once investigators had the bodies and the people who buried them, the whole structure came apart. In all, more than a dozen people were charged and convicted as part of the wider case. The investigation reached across agencies, federal Homeland Security investigators working alongside local police, coroners, and state crime labs, slowly accounting for every body and every person who had touched them. The case went to federal court in the Southern District of Ohio, in front of Judge Michael Watson. In December of 2024, after a trial, a jury convicted Williams on all 16 counts against him, including the murders, the witness killings, and the drug, robbery, and obstruction charges that surrounded them. On the 1st of July 2025, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 60 months, with 5 more life sentences ordered to run alongside them. Patrick Foster, the man who arranged to hide the bodies, received 70 months. A federal official summed it up afterward. "Drug traffickers," he said, "will go to any length to keep their enterprise running. But Larry Williams had finally been stopped. Think about the arithmetic of it. A man set out to rob a dealer of some product and some cash, a haul worth a few $1,000s at most. To protect that, he killed a bystander. To protect that killing, he killed 2 more people. And to protect those killings, he buried bodies in concrete. Every choice was meant to make the problem smaller. Every choice made it larger, until the only thing left to bury was himself. Under 8 life sentences, he will never climb out from beneath. He was not even the architect of the robbery. He was the one they called in to make it work, and he is the one who will spend the rest of his life paying for all of it. Williams kept killing to erase the witnesses to his crime. Where he killed to bury the witnesses, the man you will meet next tried to bury the crime itself. He scrubbed the weapon clean until there was nothing left to find, and that scrubbing is exactly what put him away for life. If you are finding this worth your time, subscribing is the simplest way to say so. It is free, and it keeps the next case on its way to you. Case 7. Christopher Preciado. After a drug deal turned deadly, the killer thought he had covered every angle. He wiped the gun down until there was nothing left on it, no fingerprints, no trace of him at all. And in a courtroom, that spotless weapon, that complete absence of evidence, became the very thing that proved he was guilty. Christopher Preciado was 19 years old in December of 2023. The deal that night was for marijuana, and the dealer was a 22-year-old named Matthew Guerra. Guerra was not alone. With him was his girlfriend, Savannah Soto, who was 18 and a week past her due date, ready to give birth any day to a son they had already named. All 3 of them, Guerra, Soto, and her unborn child, would die that night. On the 21st of December, 2023, Guerra and Soto were last seen heading to a drug deal near Preciado's home on a street called Charlie Chan Drive in San Antonio, Texas. When Soto missed a scheduled hospital appointment to be induced, her family panicked, and by Christmas Day, a statewide alert had gone out for the expectant mother. The following day, the 26th, the answer came. The couple was found inside Guerra's silver Kia, abandoned in an apartment parking lot. Both had been shot. By the 3rd of January, Christopher Preciado and his father, Ramon, were under arrest. Ramon was charged with helping to hide the bodies. A 3rd family member was arrested as well, though the charges against her were later dropped. It was the day after Christmas when the couple was found, and a search for a missing pregnant woman had ended in the worst way imaginable. Preciado's story was self-defense. He claimed Guerra had pulled a gun and that he had managed to take it away during a struggle. But the evidence told a very different story, and so did his own attempt to hide it. After the killings, Preciado and his father wiped down the car and the weapon, scrubbing away any DNA, any fingerprint, anything that could tie them to it. Surveillance footage even caught the older man wiping the vehicle with a towel. In court, the prosecutor did something clever with that. She stood in front of the jury and pointed to the total absence of the defendant's DNA on the gun, and she told them there was none precisely because the 2 of them had destroyed it. He had admitted, after all, that they wiped it down. The clean gun was not proof of innocence. It was proof of a man methodically erasing himself from a murder scene. The very effort Preciado made to look innocent was turned into the evidence of his guilt. There is a strange kind of trap in that. Erasing evidence is supposed to create doubt. Preciado erased it so completely that the emptiness itself pointed straight back at him, and the work that cracked the case came down to the small mistakes underneath the big cover-up. A cell phone recovered with the bodies had recently searched for Charlie Chan Drive, the very street where Preciado lived. Investigators pulled location data and matched it against street-level map imagery, and there, parked outside Preciado's home, was a pickup truck matching the one caught on surveillance near the crime. The phone had belonged to Savannah Soto, and its recent search history led investigators straight to the doorstep of the man who had drawn the couple to that street. They had leaned on the quiet digital trail he left behind. The search is on a phone, the location pings, the image of a truck parked where it had no business being. A medical examiner testified that the wounds were consistent with an intentional shooting, not the chaos of a struggle over a weapon. Preciado was charged with capital murder for the deaths of Guerra, Soto, and the unborn child. The district attorney chose not to seek the death penalty. The trial ran in a Bexar County courtroom in front of Judge Jennifer Pena, and on the 26th of March, 2026, the jury reached its verdict in under 2 hours. Guilty. Because death was off the table, the sentence was automatic. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preciado filed notice that he would appeal within days. Matthew Guerra's father faced the young man in court and told him his next stop was a penitentiary and that he believed with all his heart it would be a living nightmare for him. Preciado had tried to be careful. He wiped the gun, he scrubbed the car, he built a self-defense story. But he searched for the victim's street on a phone, posted the truth on social media, parked a recognizable truck outside his own house, and left the weapon where police would find it. He erased the one piece of evidence that might have explained him, and kept every piece that convicted him. He poured all of his care into the one thing that might have helped him, and left untouched everything that would sink him. He was 19, and he had built an entire defense around a struggle the evidence said had never taken place. Preciado tried to make the proof of one killing vanish. This next killer was something else entirely, a hired gun for an entire drug empire, and the murders he carried out to protect that empire are the exact reason it collapsed. Case 8. Clarence Brody. He was the man a Memphis drug empire called when someone needed to disappear. He killed a man who had robbed the gang while disguised as a police officer, then the witness sitting beside him, then an informant who had been secretly recording the whole operation. And every one of those killings became a brick in the case that buried the empire he was protecting. Clarence Brody, known by the nickname Killer, was a contract killer and enforcer for the Craig Petty's drug trafficking organization, a Memphis drug empire with direct ties to a Mexican cartel. It is worth being clear about who Brody was. He was not the boss. The boss was Craig Petty's. And the irony of this case belongs to the whole organization, not to one hitman. Brody was simply the hand that carried out the orders. He had a reputation, even among other criminals, as a man who killed without hesitation. Within the organization, he was a tool, pointed at whoever the boss decided had become a problem. In 2004, Petty's wanted a man named Latrell Small dead. Small had robbed a member of the organization, and he had done it while dressed as a police officer. Brody knew exactly how to get to him. He contacted Small under the pretense of planning a robbery together, a job they would pull as partners. Small showed up, and he brought a companion, a 25-year-old named Kalonji Griffin. At an apartment complex in the Hickory Hill area, Brody climbed into the back seat of their car and killed both men at close range. Small because he was the target, and Griffin because he had seen it happen. The killing that mattered most came later. A man named Mario Stewart, who was 28, had begun cooperating with police, and he had secretly recorded a gang member confessing that Petty's himself had ordered a murder. That recording was a death sentence for Stewart. One day that March, another associate drove Brody to Stewart's suburban home. Brody waited in the garage until Stewart arrived and killed him with his children inside the house. It is the kind of detail that sticks. A man killed in his own home, with his kids just rooms away. Brody was also tied to the kidnapping of a 30-year-old named Marcus Turner, whose body was later found dumped in a ditch along a road on the Mississippi line. Here is where the whole thing turns on itself. The organization killed to enforce discipline and to protect its secrets. But Mario Stewart, the man they murdered to silence, had already recorded one of their own, admitting that Petty's ordered killings. The violence the empire used to keep itself safe, the witnesses it eliminated, the informants it tried to erase, all of it fed directly into what became the largest drug prosecution in the history of the Memphis federal courts. More than 40 people were charged. More than 30 were convicted. This was not a street gang. It was a multi-million-dollar pipeline that moved narcotics from Mexico into several states, and it killed at least half a dozen people to keep itself running. The case was built on exactly what the gang had tried to destroy. The secret recordings, the cooperating co-conspirators, including the man who had driven Brody to Stewart's house and then testified about it. A sweeping federal racketeering investigation pulled together drug agents, federal marshals, and local police across several states. Petty's himself had fled to Mexico, but he was captured and brought back in 2008. The man who had ordered the killings from a safe distance was now caught in the same net as the men who had carried them out. In federal court in the Western District of Tennessee, Brody pleaded guilty in 2011 to a long list of charges: racketeering conspiracy, violent crime in aid of racketeering, for the kidnapping of Marcus Turner and the murders of Stewart, Small and Griffin, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, conspiracy to move more than 5 kilograms of cocaine. On the 3rd of January 2013, he was sentenced to 372 months, 31 years, with no parole in the federal system, plus restitution. Craig Petties, the kingpin at the top, was sentenced that August to 9 life sentences. Demetrius Fields, the associate who cooperated, received 37 years. Brody had killed to keep the organization's secrets buried. Instead, the bodies and the recordings he left behind became the prosecution's roadmap. It was the largest drug case Memphis federal court had ever seen, and the fear it generated was so real that during many of the trials, the identities of the jurors were kept secret to protect them from retribution. An organization that killed to stay hidden had made itself the most visible target in the city. Every body it left behind was another reason for federal investigators to keep pulling, until there was nothing left of the empire but a row of life sentences. Brody got 31 years for being the empire's weapon. The empire itself got nothing but ruin, and it had loaded the gun that destroyed it. Brody and the empire he served fell because of the killing they relied on to survive. The story that follows is almost absurd by comparison. He tried to buy real cocaine with money printed for the movies. 2 cases left. If you want more breakdowns like this one, subscribe while you are here. It is free, and it makes a real difference. Case 9. Alexis Marquez. He showed up to buy cocaine with about $1,300 in cash. There was only one problem. The cash was not real. It was prop money, the kind printed for film sets, designed to look convincing on camera and worth absolutely nothing anywhere else. When the dealer realized he was being robbed with fake bills, the phony deal turned into a very real killing. Alexis Federico Marquez was around 20 or 21 when it happened, and he was already no stranger to violence. A couple of years earlier, he had pleaded guilty to charges connected to shooting a man in the leg, and he had been given probation rather than prison. At the time of this killing, there was already a warrant out for him for violating that probation. His defense would later argue that drug addiction had driven his life off the rails, and that in custody he had gotten sober and earned his high school equivalency. None of that changed the warrant hanging over him, or the fact that he had already shown he was willing to pull a trigger over money. The victim was a 33-year-old man named Remy Rowland from Salt Lake City. His mother would describe him as a rare gem, a mama's boy. He was 33, and by every account he was loved. He had no idea the man coming to buy from him that night had no intention of paying. In the early hours of the 11th of August, 2022, Marquez arranged to buy roughly $1,350 of cocaine from Rowland and met him at an apartment complex in Draper, Utah. Marquez climbed into Rowland's car, and the money he brought to pay with was motion picture prop money, fake $100 bills made for film productions. He later admitted he had handed over around $2,000 in counterfeit notes. The bills were the sort of thing you might see waved around in a film, close enough to fool a camera, nowhere near good enough to fool a man holding them in his hand in the dark. A real dealer was always going to know the difference. The whole plan depended on Rowland never looking closely at what he was handed, in the middle of a drug deal, with his guard already up. It was never going to work. When Rowland realized the money was worthless, the deal collapsed into violence, and Marquez shot him multiple times, killing him. Then he fled back to his own apartment and tried to clean himself up. When police closed in, it ended in a long-armed standoff before he was finally taken into custody. It was not a quiet arrest. It was hours of officers waiting him out while he tried to find a way clear of what he had done. His story, like so many on this list, was self-defense. He claimed Rowland had reached for or pointed a gun, but no second firearm was ever found in that car. What investigators did find was damning: blood, scattered money, and spent shell casings inside Rowland's vehicle. A search turned up the drugs, the fake currency, and more casings. Surveillance footage and the data from Rowland's own cell phone led police straight to Marquez. He changed his account again and again. He had left scattered cash and spent shell casings in the car, and a story that shifted every time he told it. Piece by piece, his own words and his own phone built the case against him, the same way they did for so many of the men on this list. The case went to trial in a Utah District Court in the fall of 2025. The jury convicted Marquez of first-degree felony murder, aggravated robbery, and multiple counts of discharging a firearm causing serious injury. On the 6th of January 2026, he was sentenced to 15 years to life for the murder, with additional terms stacked on top, and he was ordered to pay restitution. That 15-year floor would run on top of whatever time he still owed for the earlier shooting that had left him on probation in the first place. In court, Marquez said he never intended to harm anyone, that in a split second he had made a decision that ruined his life. The prosecutor was unmoved, suggesting that whatever remorse Marquez felt was simply the regret of a man facing a long prison sentence. The jury had not needed long to see through the self-defense story. Strip the case down, and the stupidity of it is staggering. Marquez did not even bring real money to the robbery. He brought play money, props meant for a film set, and tried to pass them off to a drug dealer in the dark. When the bluff fell apart, as a bluff that Thin was always going to, he turned a fake transaction into a homicide. He could have walked away with nothing lost but a bad plan. Instead, he killed a man over a deal that was never real and traded the rest of his own life for it. All of it over a stack of paper that any cashier would have caught in a heartbeat. Marquez turned a counterfeit deal into a life sentence. The last man on this list went one step further into the absurd. He murdered the one person keeping him in business, his own supplier, and then tried to make the evidence disappear in a fire. Case 10. Joseph Walker. He owed his marijuana supplier a large and growing debt. Rather than pay it, he decided to rob the man, and when the supplier drove down to collect what he was owed, Walker killed the very person who kept him in business. Then he tried to make the whole thing vanish in flames, in the victim's own car. Joseph Walker was in his late 20s, living in Roanoke, Virginia, with a long history of drug and firearm offenses behind him. Together with a younger man named Garrett Williams, he sold marijuana and concentrate. Their supply came from a 20-year-old from York, Pennsylvania, named Ethan Burt, a young man known by his initials, E.B. For more than a year, Burt made the drive down from Pennsylvania to deliver product to Walker's home in Roanoke. Over time, Walker and Williams ran up a large debt to him. A younger partner, Garrett Williams, was in on the operation, and a third man would later be charged for helping after the fact. But it was Walker who carried the gun. For more than a year, the arrangement had worked. The supplier driving south, the product moving, the money mostly flowing back. Then the money stopped. Burt wanted his money. At one point, trying to track Walker down, he accidentally called Walker's mother, and somewhere in there, the two of them made a decision. They would not pay the debt, they would rob him instead. The problem with robbing the man who supplies your entire business is obvious the moment you think about it for more than a second, but they did not think about it. Kill the man who brings you the product, and there is no more product. It is the kind of plan that solves this week's problem by creating a far worse one forever. On the 17th of April, 2023, Burt arrived at Walker's home carrying about 10 pounds of marijuana and 2 pounds of concentrate. Walker had a pistol concealed on him. He confronted Burt about the phone call to his mother, and then he shot him twice, killing him, and took the drugs. To get rid of the body, Walker loaded Burt into the trunk of Burt's own car, drove out to neighboring Bedford County, and set the vehicle on fire. Firefighters were called to the burning car in the small hours of the next morning. He had kept what Burt brought, the 10 pounds and the concentrate, as if a fresh stash could somehow make the math work out. Setting the car ablaze did not erase anything. The human remains inside were identified as Ethan Burt. Virginia State Police identified Walker and Williams as suspects within 48 hours. A search of Walker's Roanoke home turned up evidence of the violence that had happened there, and then Walker did what so many of these killers do. He talked. A tip came in that he had fled to Florida, and he had reportedly told several people, including his own girlfriend, that he had killed a man back in Virginia and burned him up in a car. He was arrested in Brevard County, Florida, with a firearm and about a pound of marijuana on him. A burning car is not a way to hide a body. It is a beacon. It told investigators exactly where to start, and the remains inside gave them a name. He had told the story to so many people that by the time police had him, there was almost nothing left to prove. He had proven it himself. The killing had happened in Roanoke, which sent the case into federal court in the Western District of Virginia. built by a coalition that included federal agents, Virginia State Police, federal marshals, and firearms investigators. In January of 2025, Walker pleaded guilty to a federal robbery charge and to discharging a firearm during a drug trafficking crime. His partner, Garrett Williams, who had helped plan the robbery but was not there for the killing, pleaded guilty to conspiracy. Around the end of April 2025, Walker was sentenced to 35 years. Months later, Williams was sentenced to 150 months, about 12.5 years. The man who drove down from Pennsylvania with the drugs was dead. The supply was gone, and the debt that started all of it was never going to be collected by anyone. Think about what Walker actually accomplished. He owed a large debt to the man who kept his entire operation supplied. To avoid paying that debt, he murdered him, which instantly destroyed his own supply line forever. Then he committed arson on top of the murder, in the victim's own car, which gave investigators a burning crime scene to work backward from, and then he confessed to nearly everyone who would listen. He set out to escape a debt, and he traded it for 35 years, a destroyed business, and the certainty of a cell. It would have been cheaper, in every possible way, to simply pay what he owed. He could have settled the debt and walked away. Instead, he set a man on fire in a car and walked himself into 35 years. Every killer on this list decided that drugs or money or a secret was worth more than a human life, and every one of them ended up with nothing but a cell, destroyed by the very thing they killed to protect. Subscribe so the next investigation finds you, and we will see you on the next case.